Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Supatease here with another video, and in this one I wanted to do an update to my melee DPS tier list for Shadowlands 3v3 Arena, following the massive nerf that we saw to specializations like the Subtlety Rogue and some covenants like the Kyrian Covenant. I felt like it was important that we reviewed where the specializations now sit, in my opinion. So if you're looking to figure out where's your spec in terms of strength, where is the most likelihood for you to have success or fun and enjoyment from these specializations, that is the main purpose of constructing this tier list. So let's just get started with Arms Warrior. Despite the nerfs to the Kyrian Covenant Pelagos with the mastery reduction, Arms Warrior is still just doing a massive, monstrous amount of damage. Blade Storm, Mortal Combo, Sharpened Blade buffing Mortal Strike, and with legendaries allowing you to Mortal Strike while Blade Storming, you are just going to be an absolutely chaotic fury of death at the moment on this specialization. Its defense is also bolstered up quite heavily by things like Ignore Pain, by being able to access this absorb effect, but more particularly what is really allowing it to shine are things like Intervene and Overwatch, being able to redirect damage to itself instead of its primary target for the enemy team, and then absorb that damage with Ignore Pain, and then also additionally add Spell Reflect to the target to really annoy casters or anyone trying to get crowd control. Its ability to disrupt and do damage and everything is at the highest possible point at this moment for Arms Warrior, and I think that's why you see it in dominating fashion on the front page for 3v3 Arena. Now, my opinion of this is that it still is a very fun spec to play in the game as well because of all of these tools that it has, but at this point it is maybe potentially a bit overkill because it's got the whole package. So if you want something that's just solid, fun, and performing phenomenally, Arms Warrior is definitely still up here on the S tier. I would say it's the best melee DPS spec at the moment for 3v3 Arena. Now, Assassination Rogue. Now, a lot of you probably thinking like Subtlety Rogue got nerfed, everyone re-rolled Assassination. I don't think that that is ultimately the case. I think now after the Subtlety Rogue nerf is that Subtlety Rogue fits into a very niche composition and strategy, but it performs better than Assassination and Outlaw, which is why you're going to see where I put Assassination on this list at the moment. If you're a rogue, you are pretty much going to exclusively want to play Rogue Mage. I would recommend Fire Mage, Holy Paladin as the easiest variant of this and the most likely to succeed with a lot of instant healing and powerhouse cooldowns. I think that's one where you're going to perform the best, especially with something like Assassination Rogue, particularly at the moment. You could run more of a dampening Rogue Mage as well by picking up an Arcane Mage and a Discipline Priest. You have a little bit of option there in terms of variety, but you can play with a Hunter. You're going to need to be playing very expertly with setting your resets and your goes to make this work. I still think that Rogue Mage is probably better overall, but I have seen Hunter Rogue successful, but it's not the kind of just you're killing people instantly anymore. And Assassination, I think, performs weaker in those strategies like Rogue Mage than Subtlety still does. So for me, Assassination actually falls to about middle of the pack as an average specialization, even still being a rogue spec. I don't think that the main thing right now in the game is to have a one-shot. And Assassination's Rogue one-shot is really cheesy with a long cooldown. And outside of that, you're kind of flimsy. You can fit into Rogue Mage and get those big one-shot moments, but it's not as consistent. It's not as overbearing in my mind as a lot of the other specializations at the moment. And right now, the way the meta is evolving, it seems more like all right, pop our one-shot. Did we get a kill? No. Okay, time to get out of the pool. Wait. All right, is our one-shot up? And then go again. Subtlety performs way better in that regard than Assassination. It's not about just doing damage all the time at the moment. Enhancement Shaman, now this is a specialization. I think that has kind of come out of left field in terms of its performance overall. There's literally only one thing right now, in my opinion, that's holding it back from being an S-tier specialization, and that's the fact that it runs out of mana. Its healing is just as powerful as Retribution Paladin healing with Healing Surge, but you've got a limited resource, so you'll eventually run out of mana and not be able to continue to heal, unlike Retribution Paladin. And because of that, I think that it does fall short of the S tier, but it's definitely looking like an A tier specialization with Doom Winds and Chain Harvest and Ascendance builds fitting into the meta of what I was describing, where you activate all these cooldowns at the same time and just unleash a barrage of burst damage and overwhelm somebody right away. It 100% can do that. You're going to synergize really well with Windwalker, and Arms Warrior Warrior, which are doing really good right now. And they love to have you because you buff them up as well with Bloodlust, and you can support with your off healing at least until you run out of mana. Again, probably not as well as a Retribution Paladin because they don't run out of mana, which is what's holding it back. But Enhancement Shaman came out of nowhere. I was kind of trash talking this spec. I thought it wasn't going to be able to do very much, but it ended up falling into a very solid position at the moment. Feral Druid, this is one that I had initially put onto S tier with Shadowlands release, and it still has that big one-shot. It still has all of the good instant hybrid healing. It's still a really good specialization. You're going to fit well into things like Hunter Feral, obviously, and I've seen some players running Shadow Priest Feral, although falling off a bit now, as well as Feral Mage. Feral Mage seems to be one of the main contenders. You could possibly bring in things like Feral Warrior or Feral Windwalker. I have yet to see a lot of those specifically. People are still sticking to kind of the original niche of the Feral with a Mage and a Hunter at the moment, but they're all doing really well with it. If you're running Convoke the Spirits, you still have that big one-shot potential. That's important for the meta. Even if you don't, you'll probably have Kyrian buffing up your Ferocious Bite for massive one-shot potential. And you've got instant crowd control with Bash. You've got spammable crowd control with Cyclone. It's all around a solid spec. I'm starting to think that it's not as powerful as Retribution Paladin, Arms Warrior at the moment, and I think that it does fall a little bit short, just because you may feel more flimsy than those specializations specifically, and it's not as overbearing in terms of the amount of extra utility that it has, and its consistent damage is a bit lower as well. So for me, it's falling a lower than the S tier now. I think that it's still a really good spec, and it still will have a surprising amount of damage in a lot of situations, and you'll overwhelm a lot of potentially new players as well to the game with the specialization and the Convoke the Spirits build or the Kyrian build. But I think it's not as good as I was first anticipating it, and now having seen some of the other specializations work out. Frost Death Knight, this is now a specialization that I think fits well into the meta, extremely well into the meta. You also synergize it well with things like Arms Warrior and Windwalker Monk and even Retribution Paladin, being able to bring multiple targets together, burst them down. That's exactly what the meta is. Just get a huge one-shot off. Frost Death Knight is one of the best at doing that. You may start to notice that you're a little bit weaker defensively outside of that, but that's why it's probably not going to be going up onto the S tier. And I'm going to be reorganizing this at the end based on like what I think is the best in each row as well at the end of the video. So if you're on the left here, like enhances, it means I currently think you're better than Feral, and I'll reorganize this at the end of the video. But Frost Death Knight is also falling into the A tier specializations at the moment for me. It's not as overbearing, but it fits exactly into the meta of one shot, get out, one shot, get out, one shot, get out. There's no doubt about it. Fury Warrior, it got a bunch of stimulus packages. 5% buff, a 5% buff, a 5% buff, a 5% buff. This thing just, they can't resuscitate it. They can't get a pulse on the spec. It's not dead anymore, I guess. Maybe they did get a bit of a pulse after buffing it by 5%, 5%, 5%, but Fury Warrior just does not have that big hit anymore. It doesn't have the old school Siege Breaker build from Warlords of Draenor to one shot, so it's not fitting in the meta there. Its healing is still, it's okay, but everybody else heals now for so much, so it's like you don't really have that niche of being this kind of melee healing. You've got good mobility, I suppose, but even that was reduced by removing your honor talent that provided you mobility. You're just worse than every other melee in every regard. You're just subpar, basically. And you don't do damage either. You don't fit into the one-shot meta. You're just... I almost want to put it back on D, even despite getting 5% buff after 5% buff. I think I am. I gotta... Like, in 3v3 Arena, it's just... It's not there. There's no special or unique reason to bring it. You don't have mortal wounds. Not the extra fast mobility. It's just, there's no reason, and you're just subpar in terms of performance. For Havoc Demon Hunter, this also got a stimulus package buff, 5% damage, but it also has the Hunt from the Night Fae, which is allowing you to just immediately collapse people, fitting exactly into the meta that I was describing. So for me, Demon Hunter bringing in low cooldowns like Blur and Darkness immunities to the team to try to negate those big burst windows from other teams. Instant crowd control is very important at the moment because it's a lot easier to get. You just run over to the healer and stun them, and then press the Hunt and kill the target immediately while the healer is stunned. You don't need to worry about getting interrupted. You can't get stopped. Pretty easy to pull off, and really strong when you do. So to me, Demon Hunter isn't as durable as the other specializations, and its consistent damage outside of that window is not as good. So it falls short of the S tier, but it's still a great spec, an above average, performing a lot better than I think a lot of people were expecting because it got nerfed before coming into the expansion. But with some of the Covenant abilities added to it and the current meta being this really high burst cooldown window, it fits exactly into that right now. Outlaw Rogue, similar problem as Assassination, where it's just not going to perform as well as Subtlety and Rogue Mage. The ability to just stun 3 targets is really why Subtlety outshines them, whereas Outlaw and Assassination have to stun their target they're attacking and can't stun the healer at the same time and get around the map as easily as Subtlety to do all of that. So they're just not competing as well. They do work. It's not that they don't work, which is why they're average, but they're not going to work as well as the Subtlety Rogue. So for me, Outlaw, it's still got its gimmick of a lower cooldown blind, which you may be able to cheese some kills. It is a fun spec to play, but I don't think you're going to find the performance on it like you will with Subtlety still, even despite the nerfs. It's just coming in at about an average pace. Retribution Paladin, this one got hit once, it got hit twice, this thing got hit 3 times, its Covenant got hit, it just doesn't go down. And I mean, the reason it doesn't go down is it's just casting Word of Glory. And the main problem with Word of Glory to me is that despite it costing holy power, Retribution Paladins don't really care because all of their damage comes from that 1 minute cooldown window with Divine Toll and Final Reckoning or Sanctified Wrath. And then outside of that window, they don't really care if they're using Templar's Verdict. They're just going to use Word of Glory and keep healing everybody on their team back to full. And they don't have the liability of Enhancement Shaman where they run out of mana to keep doing it. So they'll save their holy power when their cooldowns are up to kill you in a big KO moment that you can't really respond to. And then when that KO moment isn't there, they're just a double healer. They'll just Word of Glory. And this is the main reason why it's so great. Especially when you pair it with the Arms Warrior, who brings the consistent damage and everything else that makes it, in my opinion, the best melee DPS spec at the moment. They synergize so effectively, and Retribution Paladin can synergize with other specializations like Windwalker Monk as well to pull off similar feats. So I'm a bit uncertain what they're going to do with Retribution Paladin specifically, because it is true if they reduce to the healing, then you're just a limited mobility melee. If you still had the one shot, you'd fall into the same category as Enhancement Shaman if it was possible for you to no longer use Word of Glory at some point because of another restriction like mana. You'd probably fall to A tier like Enhance, but you've got immunity cooldowns to deny big burst windows, so long as you can press them before it happens, and I'm guilty of not doing that. But for me, at the moment, despite all the nerfs, I think Retribution Paladin is still an S-tier specialization. And finally, we get to the one that I think a lot of people are wondering, where does this sit? Where did it go? What's been happening to this Subtlety Rogue after its massive nerfs? This is the spec that I think felt it the most. However, it probably deserved it the most. Being able to stun every single target on the team and then immediately kill a target in one global cooldown was probably too good. It was probably too good. The synergies with things like Shadowy Duel to remove a target into a 1v1 when nobody beats you in a 1v1 was just a 6-second window of I win when I press this. Do the other specializations need to be brought in line? Yes. Do I think that the meta as a whole should shift away from I pressed this cooldown that you have to preemptively react to or you're immediately dead into a meta where it's damage all the time, healing all the time, health bar is moving, it's not just sitting at 100% and then you're dead and then back to 100%. To me, it's just a faster paced version of the same problem in the past that the game has had now, probably since Mists of Pandaria, where the cooldowns were really introduced heavily to a lot of the specializations. Right now, it's just at its peak, where when these things are active, yeah, you better be pressing everything defensively, because if you don't, that big spike is just it's over. And if you don't know it exists, you're gone. Is it more fun than going to 80% dampening and never running out of mana? Yes, I would say that it is more fun than going to 80% dampening and never running out of mana. Does it have its own frustrations and problems, though? Yes, and what are the solutions to it, right? To me, it's try and bring down the power of the cooldowns, bring the power of the modifiers down in PvP, and then bring up everything else that's outside of that. So a mage who's casting Fireball doesn't feel like, well, this Fireball's doing nothing, I may as well just sit behind the pillar because it actually doesn't do anything, and I'm going to die more likely than this Fireball does anything. So I'm going to go behind the box. All right, Combustion's up. All right, I'm going to spam a bunch of instant pyros and kill them and make them really mad in 2 seconds. That's basically where a lot of the specs sit at the moment. I think that's where the strategies are going to evolve, having seen a lot of the compositions and things that are coming out at the moment. Subtlety Rogue still, though, even despite those nerfs, in Rogue Mage specifically, fits that meta exactly. You'll be able to stun 3 targets, prevent them from healing, and burst down a single target, despite all the nerfs. Are you as overbearing as you were before? Unlikely, however, as a composition, I think you are. I think Subtlety Rogue falls short, but I would say that it's still likely the best A tier specialization. I'm trying to put it to the left of enhancement, but this thing doesn't want to let me. I still think that it's the best of the A tier, but I don't think it's as good as the S tier ones that I'm about to outline. Now, Survival Hunter, this is one where you're limited by your pet really heavily. You're a melee DPS. You're competing with marksmanship, which is still really good despite its nerfs. It's a good secondary pickup to marksman. And if you liked the Survival Hunter spec, I still think it works. But having to deal with your pet dying, being in melee DPS, not having as big of that big burst as a lot of the other specs do, and not as much sustain. A little bit with if you play jungle with leader of the pack and with a leech pet, you'll have a little bit of sustain, but you're not gonna have that big pop healing like healing surge and regrowth and word of glory and ignore pain and crimson vial. You're just not gonna have that big pop heal. They're really long cooldowns like exhilaration, so it doesn't fit as powerfully in my mind at the moment. I think it's falling a bit short. If you play Jungle Cleave, you'll still do really good with it. But overall, as a standalone spec, I think most of the melee and casters would rather play with other specs. So it's going to fall a little bit short for me. And I'm putting it here on just average at the moment in the current meta. Now, looking at Unholy Death Knight, there's a lot of debate of like what's better, Unholy or Frost. Frost, in my mind, fits better at the moment with setting up these big burst overbearing windows of damage and doing a bunch of resets like that. And Unholy fits in metas where it's just about running the person over and keeping your damage going as much as possible. You still do have powerful cooldowns like Apocalypse and Abomination, but it's not as punchy as Frost. I think Frost is a bit easier to pull off at the moment, especially with how good it is right now. I think Unholy is still an A tier specialization though, but mostly because of its synergy with things like Warriors and Windwalkers, which are great at the moment, but it's not as good as Frost, but it's still an A tier spec. Again, and I'm outlining that by it being like the worst A tier spec, going from left to right. Subtlety being best, Enhanced second best, Feral third best, Frost fourth best, Demon Hunter fifth, sixth, like that if you're reading the tier list. Maybe Survival is probably better than Outlaw, I would say. And we'll just leave Fury down there. You know, it's maybe it'll get more stimulus packages in the future, more 5%. Windwalker finally here. This is one that just does so much damage, just all of the time, just overwhelming amount of damage. And it still has really good cooldowns. Now that rogues aren't going to just kind of one-tap them and KO them in a stun, which I think was one of their biggest weaknesses, I think that it's clear that Windwalker is going to be a dominant spec, competing with Arms Warrior and Retribution Paladin at the moment for the S tier category. You still have that self-sustainability, and again, you don't have that limited resource. You've got a little bit of cooldowns on things like Expel Harm, but you're never going to be at a point where you just have nothing you can do defensively. You have so many cooldowns to trade with Fort Brew and Karma and Diffuse Magic. If you don't use these cooldowns, you will explode. But in the hands of a good player, you'll trade these and notice that you can almost always have an answer to a lot of the big burst setup windows. You fit really well with things like Frost Death Knights, Unholy Death Knights, even Warriors or Retribution Paladins, and setting up people grouped together for stuns and then bursting them down, overwhelming them with massive damage. I mean, it's no doubt that Windwalker at the moment, I would say, is an S tier specialization. I'm very tempted to say that it's better than Ret. I think it is better than Ret, so I'm putting it above Ret. Arms being the best, Windwalker second best, Ret being the third best. You may think, hey, how's Windwalker better than Ret? I see Ret all the time. I think that's probably more or less because Ret is more popular. You see more of it. If Windwalker was more popular, I think you would see more of it because its consistent damage is way higher, and things like Arms Warrior Windwalker, probably the best comp in the game, one of the best comps in the game. At the moment, I think it would make sense to put it just slightly above Ret, and they're all S tier level. They all bring in a lot of utility, defense, damage, overwhelming burst window setups, the entire package. They are the top dogs that pick amongst the rest of the litter for who they want to carry, basically, or they just play with each other and then ignore everybody else that's down beneath them. And they're the most desirable specs, I would say, at the moment. The other specs you may need to make a little bit of an argument for, or they only have a specific niche setup or a couple of subsets of classes that they can work with, or you're just dead. You're just dead tier. Other than that, thank you very much for watching the video today. I hope you enjoyed this melee DPS tier list update since that massive wave of nerfs. If you did, please leave the video with a like, comment down below with your thoughts on where you would put the melee DPS currently. I'd love to hear it. More opinions as well, as I want this to be a resource for everybody to get the information they need for the gameplay they want in Shadowlands here. Other than that, check out some of my other videos. I have them linked above here. I stream on twitch.tv/Supatease. You can follow me on twitter.com at Supatease. You can follow me on Instagram at Supacasting as well. And other than that, I'll see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.